This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 46 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to offer an every-person viewpoint to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult decisions at the end of life.
So welcome to this week's show. Please relax, get yourself a mug of hot chocolate, and add some extra marshmallows. You deserve it. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we continue with our series titled Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Cancer But Didn't Have Anyone to Ask, with a conversation about cancer myths and misconceptions. Like the BBC, we see our show as offering entertainment, enlightenment, and education and divide that into three halves to address each of these goals. Our main topic is in the second half, so feel free to fast forward to that babble-free zone. In the first half, Charlie has our recipe of the week and the last words before death from 10 famous people. In the second half, I'm going to continue our series with a discussion about the myths that are associated with cancer. And in the third half, we welcome back Dr. Gina Ford with her perspective about cancer myths that she's encountered in her work with people from the Native American and Hispanic communities.
In our first half, the Everyone Dies road trip takes us to Connecticut. Connecticut. There we are. The home of the 1988 film Mystic Pizza. Connecticut earned the nickname the Nutmeg State due to the shrewdness and resourcefulness of its residents. This nickname has its roots in the 18th and 19th centuries, when sailors would bring exotic spices back from their voyages. These spices, including nutmeg, were highly prized and sought after for their exotic flavors. Some unscrupulous traders would carve small pieces of wood into the shape of nutmeg seeds and sell them to unsuspecting buyers. This led to the reputation of Connecticut as a place where people were resourceful and shrewd, much like the traders who were able to pass off fake nutmeg as real, establishing one of our nation's first alternate truths. In 2021, the Connecticut House of Representatives approved a bill that solidified pizza as the official state food of Connecticut. New Haven-style pizza, also known as a pita, or a Pete's, has its roots in the Italian-American community in New Haven, Connecticut. The first pizzeria in New Haven, Frank Pepe Pizzeria Napoletana, opened in 1925. The restaurant's founder was born in Italy and brought his family's pizza recipe with him when he emigrated to the United States in the early 1900s. What sets New Haven-style pizza apart from other styles of pizza is its thin, crispy crust and slightly charred edges. Cut it into squares to take to your next funeral lunch. Bon appetit! Now, do you ever wonder what your last words before death might be? Mine will probably be, "Here, hold my martini." But what about the last words from people more famous than I? From William Pitt the Younger, British Prime Minister 1801, "I think I could eat one of Bellamy's veal pies." Next, from William Bucky O'Neill, American war hero, 1898, "Sergeant, the Spanish bullet isn't made that will kill me." Franz Ferdinand, Austrian Archduke, 1914, "It's nothing." D.H. Lawrence, British author, 1930, "I'm getting better." Anna Pavlova, Russian ballerina, 1931, "Get my swan costume ready." Richard A. Loeb, American playboy and convicted murderer, 1936, "I think I'm going to make it." Douglas Fairbanks Sr., American actor, 1939. I've never felt better. John Barrymore, American actor, 1942, who just happens to be Drew Barrymore's grandfather. I should say not, dear fellow. No Barrymore would allow such a conventional thing to happen to him. H. G. Wells, British author, 1946. Go away, I'm all right. And Lenny Bruce, American comedian, 1966. You know where I can get any shit? Please go to our webpage for this week's recipe and additional resources for this program. Everyone Dies is offered at no cost, but is not free to produce. Can we count on you to contribute? Your tax-deductible gift will go directly to supporting our nonprofit journalism so that we can remain accessible to everyone. You can also donate at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org, or at our site on Patreon, www.patreon.com, and search for Everyone Dies. Marianne?
Thank you, Charlie. In my work as a nurse practitioner taking care of people diagnosed with cancer, they would ask questions that relate to myths and misconceptions about cancer. So I thought we should address them right up front. Even though there is no scientific information to support them, there are popular ideas about how cancer starts and spreads that may seem to make sense. But wrong ideas about cancer can lead to needless worry and even interfere with good prevention and treatment options. So, let me just lay them out there for you. 1. Is cancer a death sentence? In the United States, the likelihood of dying from cancer has dropped steadily since the 1990s. 5-year survival rates for some cancers, such as breast, prostate, and thyroid cancers, are now at 90% or better. The 5-year survival rate for all cancers combined is currently about 69%. For more information, we have a table in the show notes that shows current numbers about cancer, different types of cancer rates, and death rates. 5-year survival rates are based on data from large numbers of people. How long an individual cancer patient will live and whether they will die from the disease depends on many factors, including whether the cancer is slow or fast-growing, how much the cancer is spread in the body, whether effective treatments are available, and the person's overall health, to name a few. 2. Will eating sugar make my cancer worse? I've had this question numerous times from my patients, and the answer is no. While cancer cells use more sugar than normal cells, no studies have shown that eating sugar makes cancer grow faster. However, a diet high in sugar can lead to weight gain, which is associated with an increased risk of cancer. Eating too much sugar can lead to weight gain, which can increase the risk of obesity, diabetes. Obesity causes inflammation and is linked to the higher chance of a cancer diagnosis and recurrence. We have a podcast about inflammation that will be helpful for you to listen to. 3. Is cancer contagious? In general, no. Cancer is not a contagious disease that easily spreads from one person to another. The only situation in which cancer can spread from one person to another is in the case of organ or tissue transplantation. A person who receives an organ or tissue from a donor who's had cancer in the past may be at an increased risk of developing a transplant-related cancer in the future. However, that risk is extremely low, about 2 cases of cancer per 10,000 organ transplants. Doctors avoid the use of organs or tissues from donors who have a history of cancer. In some people, cancers may be caused by certain viruses, some types of HPV, for example, and bacteria, such as H. pylori. While a virus or bacteria can spread from one person to another, the cancers they sometimes cause cannot spread from one person to another. Number 3, does my attitude, positive or negative, determine my risk of getting or surviving cancer? To date, there are no convincing scientific studies that links a person's attitude to their risk of developing or dying from cancer. A study of over 100,000 women in the UK showed no link between stress and breast cancer risk. Also, a European study of over 100,000 people found no evidence of a link between stress and the risk of common cancers. If you have cancer, it's normal to feel sad, angry, or discouraged sometimes, and positive and upbeat at other times. People with a positive attitude may be more likely to maintain social connections and stay active, and physical activity and emotional support may help you cope with your cancer diagnosis and treatment. 4, can cancer surgery or a tumor biopsy cause cancer to spread in the body? The chance that surgery will cause cancer to spread to other parts of the body is extremely low. Following standard procedures, surgeons use special methods and take many steps to prevent cancer cells from spreading during biopsies or surgery to remove tumors. For example, if they must remove tissue from more than one area of the body, they use different surgical tools for each area. Number 5, will cancer get worse if exposed to air? No. Exposure to air will not make tumors grow faster or cause cancer to spread to other parts of the body. Number 6, do cell phones cause cancer? We often hold our phones to our heads or keep them close in our pockets or bags. Some people are worried that the radiation from mobile phones can cause cancer, especially brain cancer, or that keeping phones in a bra will lead to breast cancer. But no, cell phones do not cause cancer according to the best studies completed so far. Cancer is caused by DNA damage or mistakes, and cell phones emit a type of low-frequency energy that does not damage genes. There's also no reliable evidence that 4G and 5G mobile networks cause cancer. Phone masts that transmit mobile signals, these are called mobile base stations, use the same radio frequency radiation as mobile phones. Although 4G and 5G mobile networks are higher energy than older networks, it's still not enough energy to damage DNA. And research in this field is ongoing in case there's any long-term health effects. 7, do power lines cause cancer? No, not according to the best studies completed so far. Power lines emit both electric and magnetic energy. The electric energy emitted by power lines is easily shielded or weakened by walls and other objects. The magnetic energy emitted by power lines is a low-frequency form of radiation that does not damage genes. Question 8. If someone in my family has cancer, am I likely to get cancer too? Not necessarily. Cancer is caused by changes or mistakes in genes. Only about 5 to 10% of cancers are caused by harmful mutations that are inherited from a person's parents. In families with an inherited cancer-causing mutation, multiple family members will often develop the same type of cancer. These cancers are called familial or hereditary cancers. The remaining 90 to 95% of cancers are caused by mutations that happen during a person's lifetime as a natural result of aging and exposure to environmental factors such as tobacco, smoke, and radiation. These cancers are called non-hereditary or spontaneous cancers. Number 9. If no one in my family's had cancer, does that mean I'm risk-free? No. Based on most recent data, about 39% of men and women will be diagnosed with cancer at some point during their lives. Most cancers are caused by genetic changes that occur throughout a person's lifetime as a natural result of aging and exposure to environmental factors such as tobacco smoke and radiation. Other factors, such as the kind of food you eat, how much you eat, and whether you exercise, may also influence your risk of developing cancer. For example, eating a diet of processed and red meat can increase your risk of bowel cancer. And drinking alcohol increases the risk of 7 types of cancer, including bowel and breast cancer. Number 10, do antiperspirants or deodorants cause breast cancer? No. Some people are worried that aluminum in deodorants and aerosol sprays cause breast cancer. In part, this worry stems from these products being applied near the breast. The best studies so far have found no evidence linking the chemicals typically found in antiperspirants, aluminum, and deodorants with changes in breast tissue. Number 11, does talcum powder cause cancer? There's not enough evidence to say that talcum powder causes cancer. Some small studies suggest an increased risk of ovarian cancer in women who use talcum powder on their genitals. But other, more reliable studies do not find a link between talcum powder and ovarian cancer. Talcum powder as a cause of cancer has been in the news. These headlines are usually related to past use of talcum powder, which was potentially contaminated with asbestos. Asbestos is a known cause of cancer, and talcum powder should not have asbestos in it. Number 12, do artificial sweeteners cause cancer? In 2023, stories about aspartame and cancer were in the news and on social media. Because of this, some people are worried that artificial sweeteners used in food and drink can cause cancer. But there is no strong evidence that artificial sweeteners, including aspartame, cause cancer. The best studies of people do not show a link between artificial sweeteners and cancer. There's no reliable evidence for artificial sweeteners causing cancer from animal studies, and there's no good explanation for how artificial sweeteners could cause cancer. So how do you know if the information you're reading is misinformation? Well, we have a guide in our show notes to help you with that. Charlie, any questions?
Yeah, I don't remember if I asked you this before, but okay, so let me ask you, cancer. Has this been around since the dawn of Homo sapiens, like, 300,000 years ago?
Well, we've talked about how, like, in the dawn of Homo sapiens, tigers and
Oh
bears
my.
and lions and
And
big
and
animals.
Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and, of course, Scarecrow and
Those
Elephant.
were the causes of death, being, eaten by a larger animal than ourselves, or falling and smacking your head and bleeding out. And people didn't live long enough to get cancer, typically, as far
Okay.
as we know.
Okay.
I mean, how would we know if they died from cancer or eaten by a tiger?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So,
But, the longer our genes have to make mistakes or to accumulate mistakes, the greater the risk. And if you die young, that there's less risk of Alzheimer's or of cancer. And we're seeing an increase. We've talked about that with colon cancer. We've seen an increase in young people getting cancer now.
right. Yeah.
But it seems to be related to their diets. The ultra processed foods and lack of care in the microbiome that seems to have that effect.
And speaking of the youngins, with so much stress coming from social media, and that's become a big issue now. People isolating around, their video devices. God, I'm sounding old. Video devices, around their iPhones and stuff like that. Can a tremendous amount of stress cause cancer?
Well, I've facilitated cancer support groups, and if you sit in there and you'll hear people talk about, I had one nurse who said, you can't tell me that it's not stress related, because she said she got her ovarian cancer right after her hospital was going through a union vote or something, and she was convinced it came from stress. it's a hard thing to kind of quantify in terms of you'd have to watch people over their entire life and look at their risk of cancer, which some of the longitudinal studies are doing.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
I think anything is possible. The question is, like with a lot of these things, is that we don't have reliable evidence. Does that make it couldn't be possible? Well, I've come from a mindset that anything's possible. It's
That's true.
possible.
In our third half, we welcome back Dr. Gina Ford, a clinical nurse specialist from the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of New Mexico Health System in Albuquerque.
So, Gina, you're going to offer us, and let me say thank you for being here, but, get right down to business, not messing around here. You're going to offer us the perspective of your work in with Native American populations and with Hispanic populations, and your work in hospice and supportive care, palliative care. In terms of myths and misconceptions, like what have you heard from the people that you care for?
Yeah, I think that, cancer by itself is such, it's like you get hit with a wrecking ball. I mean, it's such a shock and it's such a devastating diagnosis. Even the cancers that are not as serious as the others, I think the knee-jerk reaction across the board is it's a death sentence. And I hear that from everyone is, I'm going to die. Am I going to die? And, even if the oncologist reassures them we have treatment for this, we can respond well to treatment, it's still understandably a huge, huge fear. And, we don't simply have enough time to go into, a lot of the distrust of the Western, medical system mistrust, especially from the indigenous populations of our Western mainstream medical system. And so I think there's some concern about the medical treatment that they're going to get. Am I going to get the treatment that's as good as, I'm in New Mexico, so because I'm coming from the reservation, are you going to give me the treatment that you give the wealthy people from Santa Fe? Is there a discrepancy there? So I see a lot of that, and so I have to do a lot of education, reassurance about that, talking about, our cancer treatments are, national protocols. And, I'll even pull up the guidelines, the NCCN guidelines, the ASCO guidelines. I use the NCCN guidelines and say, look, here's the diagnosis, and then here's the recommended treatment guidelines. And this is where they're getting this. And this is what we do for everyone to kind of let them know, this is where this is going on. And then, we do talk about response to treatment. And yes, some are worse than others, but it's important that they realize that not all cancer, is a death sentence. Other things, is it contagious? Do I have to worry about giving this to my kids, to my family? What about the treatments? Can I go home? Do I have to stay someplace else? Other things, is this not just contagious, but is this genetic? Is this something I'm going to give to my children? And thankfully, I think we've made a lot of strides in that. And most robust cancer centers, they have specialists that can address this. But other things I hear, and I'm sure you've heard as well, is that, this is some form of punishment or bad luck. Am I doing this? Am I getting this because I did something wrong? And, is God angry with me? We can kind of go down those rabbit holes. Other things I've heard is, is this because of the cell phone in my pocket? Is this because I dyed my hair? Is this because of the power lines? People are really start searching for an answer of why did this happen to me? And so it really, they come in with a lot of heavy questions because, from what I see in my experience, most cultures don't openly talk about cancer, especially in indigenous communities. And so it's, they come in and look for a safe place and really want a lot of answers. And sometimes we don't have answers. As you know, we don't know what causes these cancers. And they're looking for what happened, what did I do wrong, and chemotherapy is the worst thing imaginable. I'm going to be in so much pain. If I have this surgery or biopsy, is this going to spread it? And then, what really concerns me is then, they can start looking for cures for the cancer, and so then they start going down there's these misconceptions about that. And so it's something we have to be really, really careful about, because there are so many misconceptions out there about not only what can cause it, but what can help it. And so, really, I feel like, and I'm sure, and when you worked in palliative care, I feel like 80% of my job is just education. I do so much talking to my patients, and, not just the patients, but the families, and trying to talk to them about, kind of avoiding the inevitable stigmas that go around this and the fears, because that can also fuel the stigmas and, all of these myths that go along with that. And
are there stigmas in the Native American population to having cancer?
I think that any time that there is unknown, that there are stigmas around that. And I think one of the biggest stigmas around that, as we've talked about before, is that, a lot of Indigenous, and this is a kind of a generalization here, but a lot of Indigenous people really believe in living traditionally, if they're traditionalists, kind of believe in balance. And if you're sick, what I've seen the most part is either one of two things. One is there's been an imbalance and something went wrong in our life. And either I did not live right, I've done something wrong, I, partied too much, I didn't, I wasn't living my life the way I should have. I was working, in mines. I was working in a place that I was exposed to something. Something went wrong, and now I have this illness, and my life is, basically out of whack. I'm not harmonious, and so that's, kind of an external reason why this happened versus something else in my external environment that caused this, and sometimes that is, the case. It's an environmental factor, but that's a lot rarer, I think, than people automatically kind of go to that. But, is it something, and I can understand why we automatically go to that. A lot of, people kind of look to that. Is it something in the water? Is it something in the air? Because historically there have been things that have caused that, but there are.
Well, that's what I was kind of wondering. There's, historically the stories about putting, was it smallpox on the blankets that were given to different tribes. So is there any of that kind of historical mistrust related to cancer?
There is, and there are, especially New Mexico, with the uranium mines, with some of that going into the water, there, and then as we all know, especially, with the movie that just came out, for Pete's sake, my son just saw it, about the atom bomb and the testing here, there's the Tularosa Basin, the downwinders, none of those families, when they were tested, when they tested the atom bomb at the Trinity site, all of the Hispanic people and the Native people down there, they ended up getting cancer, and a lot of their children and all of that. The land and the water were radiated from that, and there's multi-generational consequences. So and they've never been compensated for that. And so, there is some of that, but I will say, that is really the exception and not the norm. For the most part, when we see people come in, that is not usually the case. Now, we do have people that come in that have lived in that area, and yes, more than likely that is what's coming from. In fact, they've made movies and books about that, and one of them is really good. It's called First We Bombed New Mexico. And so there is truth to that, absolutely. And there's truth to other reservations, and the draining. And I think that's why there's so much hesitancy whenever they do the pipelines on reservations, because there's fear about what's going to cause that. But I think that when people come in, the first thing we need to do is, okay, what are we dealing with? What do we have? What do we know at hand? And let's talk about that. Because again, I think people are searching and looking for why. Why is this happening to me? What is causing this? And I can completely understand that. I've been on the other side of that, where I've had my loved ones, whether it's cancer, ALS, dementia, and I'm looking for that too. We all want an answer: why is this happening? And I remember somebody telling us, well, sometimes these things just happen, and it was all I could do not to leap across the desk and slap them. Because I was like, do not tell me that. That is not good enough. It feels like, you're being brushed off. And so I completely understand. But, the best thing I can do for my patients is really, I don't want them to start blaming themselves. I don't want them to start blaming, their family, or, I want them to, I feel like knowledge is power. And so let's focus on what we do know. Let's focus on, the treatment that's lying ahead. I can tell you about that. I can tell you about the treatment that's coming. I can tell you about some of the side effects that's coming and how I can help you with the side effect of that. And, I'm going to be with you during these side effects, and I'm going to help with this. And we can talk about the scans that are coming up and why these scans are important and why I want you to go to these, and, why these scans aren't going to make your cancer worse, because there is fear about that. And so those are the things that, that we talk about. And, one of the things that I hear a lot is they're, really scared about pain. They're always worried that, am I going to die in pain? And so there's a lot of concern about that. And so, there's, lots and lots of questions, and it's not a one and done thing. As we know, all of these visits, whether it's outpatient or inpatient, you have so many people talking at you, and you can only absorb so much information. And then you go home and go lay down, and when the house gets quiet, your mind's still going, and you start thinking and get nervous. And so we will revisit these over and over, and sometimes with their family, they have their own questions. And then when the patients are by themselves, sometimes, especially with the men, and they're by themselves, they'll bring up concerns that they're not going to want to talk about in front of their family. And so, again, because they don't want to talk openly about their fears. And that's okay. And so it is, there's a lot of different myths and misconceptions out there. And then, they look at Dr. Google, and that can be even worse. So
Right.
That's something we have to talk about.
Or
too.
the support groups, on Facebook or posts on Instagram that, you read out of context and they scare you too. And so, one thing maybe listeners can suggest to other people is that when you go home after, somebody's talked with you about these things, is that if you have questions, look at our website. We've done so many podcasts about so many different topics. Go and listen to, expert information and not the things that are going to scare you. So maybe that's an alternative too.
I think that is so important. And I always tell them, please don't be scared to talk to your oncologist. So many of them are scared to talk to their cancer doctors because they're worried, well, if I tell them I have a new symptom or what I'm afraid of, that's going to translate into the cancer is progressing, or I don't want this treatment. And so I've seen it so many times where, nope, everything's fine. Nope, everything's fine. And so, they are the experts in this. And please talk to them about this. I'm like, believe me, there's nothing you can say to them that they haven't heard at least twice before. Right. Talk to them about this. And it's important, I think that's important. And, or talk to somebody about that, because this is too great a load to carry alone. And it's really important to have people in your life, help you with this. And, there are so many people out there ready to tell you what to do and how to live and give this advice. And that can be, and it comes, I believe, I try and tell everyone that comes from a place of love and good intention, but it also can be dangerous. And so, to be very careful about what you read out there. I just think that it's important for people to realize that they're not alone, and just to have their people around them, but just to be very careful of, like you said, the support groups and Facebook and Dr. Google and all of these, cure-alls, which I know we'll talk about in a later podcast.
Or places where nobody is monitoring what is said.
Exactly.
Just because somebody, I used to say this to my kids when they would, argue with each other. It's like, just because, the other one said it doesn't make it true. So you got to be a consumer of information, not just take everything that flows before your eyes.
Exactly. You can't take everything that somebody says as gospel and just say, well, because it happened to them, that must be true. That's very dangerous. And
right.
So, and I always tell people, you can have two people, same age, same diagnosis, and that doesn't mean they're going to respond the same way. And so you need to, keep that in the back of your mind. And, because people sometimes I've had, and I don't think there's anything wrong with going to support groups, because there is something to be said with being around other people that are going on the same journey as you. But I've also had other people walk away and say, it just made me feel worse, because these people are doing much better than I am, and they're looking at me like I'm some sort of, science experiment, and I'm going to die any day. Why are they doing better than I am? Why are they responding to treatment? And so it's not for everyone. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying it, but, if it doesn't work, that's okay. I just think it's important to have your community around you for support, whomever that may be.
Right. Well, Gina, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and we appreciate your input and perspective always. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's it for this week's episode. Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from Anna Quindlen, here is one of the worst things about having someone you love die. It happens again every single morning.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.